Hi, my name is Marie Chang, and today I'm going to show you how to draw yourself in the art style of Gravity Falls. I'll be doing this tutorial on my iPad Pro in Adobe Fresco, but you can do this on paper or using your own materials or tablet. The principles are the same no matter what medium you're using. So as always, I start off by referencing existing characters in the show. I'm going to be drawing myself as a friend of Mabel's, and Candy Chew is the closest comp in terms of height and design, myself being an Asian woman. So I decided to use her as my primary reference moving forward and creating this character. I'm going to start by using Mabel's proportions as a reference. I just like to trace over the characters very loosely and get a feel for, what the shapes are like, what the proportions are like, and even just the way that they're posed. I like that their arms are like a little noodly, but not too noodly. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's something that you realize just from drawing over those characters, so I always like to start with that. Then I'll do a very rough sketch like I'm doing now. Again, just getting in really loose construction lines. I'm using general shapes like a sphere just to get the head to look like it has some sense of volume. And then I'm just kind of playing around with different hairstyles and different looks that my character could embody. But this stage is for exploration, so don't feel like you're tied to whatever your first sketch is. So now that I have the head, I'm going to go ahead and just rough in the rest of the body and some of the features using, again, those reference images. Sometimes it's a little tricky to get the proportions right when you're trying to be true to your own look and your own dimensions, but also fit the style of the show. Like, these eyes were a huge struggle for me because I wanted to model them after the only other Asian character in the show that I could find. There might be more, but this was the most prominent one. But at the same time, I don't have the same exact features, even being an Asian person, as every other individual of my demographic. So wanting to differentiate some of your own features while retaining that design style can be a challenge. Now, in order to make sure that my body proportions that I roughed in were accurate, I decided to do a side-by-side comparison with the existing character designs. This just really helps me get a feel for, is my head a little too small? Are my arms a little too long? Am I too thin? Am I too wide? It's all up to you, but I just like to do this process because even though I'm not going to have the exact same proportions, it does help me a lot to see my design next to an actual one from the show. If we were to break down the proportions, it's about the whole length of the body is about 1.5 heads high, I would say. At least that's from me measuring it out in my very rough way. But, generally, if it looks a little bit off, it's worth taking some time and reevaluating it. At this point, I'm kind of trying to break down the construction of my legs to my main torso and trying to figure out, like, okay, I think something looks off, but how can I actually fix that? And what needs to be adjusted. As you know, I love inverting my drawings back and forth because when I inverted this, I realized that that arm was way too exaggerated. And even now it looks a little exaggerated, but it's trying to at least match what Dipper looks like. And when you see your drawing from the opposite perspective, it just becomes a lot easier to see all of the weird spots. This sketch is still very rough, but I do feel confident enough to do a rough line art pass. This will make it a lot easier for me to go actually do my clean line and eventually color. So I'm just going to go through with a thinner pen or brush, whatever you want to call it, and just really roughly draw around my initial sketch. I'm trying to make the lines a little tighter and cleaner, but still keeping them loose so that I feel like I have room to adjust if I need to. And again, you just want to keep in mind the shapes and the volumes when you're doing this. Don't just trace what was underneath. Make sure you're thinking about the actual form as you're going through this process. To draw in the little, like where the blush would be for my design, I don't think I'm going to keep in the lines for that, but I just wanted to have a placeholder so I could kind of use it to gauge if my face was in the right place. I know that sounds weird, but just to try to get a feel for what it looks like in proportion to the rest of my head, it was really helpful just to have those little dots there. I also wanted to adjust this hand because the more I looked at it, the more it just looked strange. I know that I was referencing Dipper before, but this just looked more natural. And then I also wanted to lower my shoulders. In real life, I have a habit of making my shoulders go all the way up, like to my neck anyways, but I didn't want my character to be that exaggerated. So yeah, we're going to go with this. And now I'm just going to do some final adjustments and clean up those lines a little bit. Try to make sure, like I mentioned before, that my face is positioned properly within my head shape. And then I can move on to doing some clean line art. So for clean line art, I'm using the pen brush as opposed to a pen tool, but you can use whatever method works best for your process. Right here, I'm just trying to get, a more defined line around my initial rough drawing. I also noticed that in the Gravity Falls stills, a lot of the characters have greater variation in the line width, and just the way that they are drawn has a lot more, a variation of line weight, I should say. And when I was going through this, I just wanted to see what it looked like with a consistent even line weight. And then after I finish doing this, I'll go back over it with a different type of brush. I'm going to go over it with Belgian Comics if you're using Adobe Fresco. And I'm basically going to do just a little bit, like I'll add a couple details so that it looks more like the way that they do it in the show. But I like having this blueprint. I like doing it this way first. Sometimes I get really obsessed with like getting the most beautiful stroke down, and that's not really super constructive. But if you're able to do it that way, go ahead and do that first. For me, I like having this kind of line work to go off of. I can adjust little things like the eyebrows, I can adjust the mouth and see if I'm happy with the way the teeth and the smile look. And then when I'm, content with that, I can move on and use the Belgian Comics brush to do a more varied line around my initial design. So based off of those stills, I'm going to go on the outside of the design. A lot of the interior details tend to be a thinner line than the ones around it. So that's the reference that I'm using. And I know it looks a little funky right now, but once you do it to the entire drawing, it'll look a lot more cohesive and it adds a nice sense of dimension to your drawing. And yeah, you just want to, try it out, see what works best for you. But for the most part, this is a, dealer's choice. You just kind of figure out what looks best to you. I did choose to add a little bit of this type of brush on the interior lines as well, but it's not anything that's too extreme or different than what was there before. And once you're happy with your line art, you can go ahead and move on to color. There's a couple different ways that you can start your coloring process. I'm going to start with my skin tone this time just because I want to get a feel for how that's going to read with all the other colors I'll choose for my outfit and my hair. But, you should do whatever is most comfortable for you. I know some people who prefer to color using bucket fill, or they don't like using layers the way that I do. But I prefer to separate each color out onto separate layers, and that makes the process a lot easier for me later on in case I have to change one color, or I decide that I want to replace that layer with something else altogether or use a filter on it. It just makes my process a lot cleaner. So right now I'm playing around with different options for the colors of my clip and my scrunchie, and I think I finally settled on those choices because they were the closest to the colors I would have picked at this age. I really liked the blue tones that I ended up going with for this, for my overalls. I think they fit the show so well, and they kind of have this bright but warm and, inviting feel to it. And I just added a couple little details. I ended up putting these on the multiply layer and bringing the opacity down quite a bit so that they wouldn't pop too much. But there is a little bit of detail in the designs of these characters, and I kind of liked that. So I wanted to keep that. And then when I was deciding on hair color, I tried my best to reference Candy's hair, but I also wanted to make it my own, so I kind of just experimented with different options. And then, of course, I had to add the blush in, and then once I added the blush in, I erased the line art around it, and there you go. This looks so much more like a Gravity Falls character already because we don't have those placeholder lines on my cheeks. If you do use the bucket fill tool like I did to adjust the colors of an existing pixel layer in Adobe Fresco, just make sure you go back and clean that up. Right now I'm going to add a scrunchie. It just looked really odd when there wasn't like a scrunchie on the other end. I know technically in real perspective you probably wouldn't see it, but I just felt like design-wise I needed to add something there. It just looked wrong to me. Maybe I had the wrong instinct, but it just felt a little better. And once that was done, I went through and had a lot of fun designing these shoes. That's something that I really like about the Gravity Falls art style. I think their shoes look so cool, and these would have been like my dream shoes to have as a kid. And just adding the little details makes all the difference. And then now, of course, that I'm done, I'm going to organize all my layers, and here is the final product. This is me drawn in the art style of Gravity Falls. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.